Okay, so for those listening on this live stream, we are about to embark on a software architecture review for a piece of functionality which will be in an experimental form in the next version of Wolfram language. I really haven't seen any of this particular design yet. And what we're talking about is the connection between Wolfram language and MongoDB, something that we have been building internally for use with our machine learning training frameworks, but we'll be making it also available to users. Okay, so I think, Sebastian, maybe you should share here and give us a demo.
Sure, cool. So share screen. Okay, do you see my screen?
I do.
Okay, cool. So to run this, there's instructions here for how to do this on your local machine. Once you've installed MongoDB on your...
Wait a minute. So there is a default install of MongoDB, and it uses a certain port.
Yes.
Default port, okay. And that is the default port from the Mongo installation.
Exactly. So MongoDB, it always uses this port if you install it locally by default.
Okay, fine. Okay, and so, what happens if you want to use a different port? I mean, if your MongoDB installation is different. So,
oh, sure, yeah.
Is there an IP? I mean, we have some kind of IP address wrapper which contains port numbers, don't we?
That's a good question.
I think so. If you look at IP address, and just go to the, our documentation. Okay, so that's an address.
Okay.
Now look in the C alsos there.
See also host lookup, socket connect, URL, ping time.
Okay, so socket connect. Look at socket connect. Okay, so that is a host and a port number. See there?
Yes.
You can give it the host and port number.
Okay, is this a symbol?
Socket
yeah, it's an object. Sure. Okay, I see. Yeah. Okay, cool. That's great. So let me just actually, rather than doing that from the documentation, I'm just going to open it from this place so that we don't destroy the state. Okay, cool.
All right.
So I'll just make a note here as well of this. Okay, but yeah, so you can set the port, obviously. At the moment, there's a default argument for, the two arguments are host and then port.
Okay, which should be packaged differently because that's the way they're packaged in the socket objects.
Yes.
Right. And that thing should also accept a socket object.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a very good point. Okay. So socket object note. Okay. Cool. So basically, on your local machine, if you've installed MongoDB, you can just run Mongodb.
Wait. Okay. So back up to what happened there. So you said open Mongo connection. That is very different from the structure of other kinds of database connections, right? What is the analogous thing for in the new database framework? What's the analogous thing? It would be something like database connect, would it not? Would be the name of the function.
That's a good question. I copied the open SQL connection, I think.
Yeah, but that's from the old database link.
Yes.
Being not from the new thing. I think it's database connect. Does anybody here know? Nope. Okay. Aren't Carlo and Ricardo?
I'm pretty sure Ricardo and them are there. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was muted. I mean, I'm not sure that this is like the same level as Database Connect. I think I know that like we're kind of database link is going to be deprecated somehow.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm just looking at the naming conventions here. Given that this is, first question is, right now this is purely a Mongo link. Eventually, it will be a general link to some kind of key value store, presumably.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I mean, it might be the case that this gets completely subsumed by what Ricardo, Leonid, and I are doing, and it's like this is what's running under the hood. And so,
so you're saying in that case, this would just be one of the things that is an option. If you do a database connect and the target database is MongoDB, then this is what would happen.
Exactly. And if we're going to do that, then calling it Database Connect now might be premature.
No, I'm not suggesting Database Connect. I'm not suggesting that. I'm simply suggesting that
Mongo Connect or something.
Yeah, MongoDB Connect. I mean, I would think that was probably the corresponding that's a minor suggestion. I think that's probably what we should do, because I think that's the more.
By the way, what we are doing for database is different. We have a lazy connection, and we are managing the connections. And so basically, you can query at any moment what are the overhead connection, but basically you specify the connection, but the fact that you are specifying the connection doesn't mean that you're actually doing the actual connection operation. Then you just pass this argument later to the query or something, and the query will take care of
Okay, but so is it the case that there's a function database connect that returns a lazy database connection, or does it work differently?
This is also lazy. Like it doesn't
wait. I'm trying to understand from Ricardo there. Is there a function called database connect?
Not really. What we have is database connections, and basically open and close, and this is returning the opened connection at the moment.
No, I understand that that's a querying, but I'm saying you've got a database sitting out there in the world. You want to create a quote potentially lazy, but you want to create a connection to that database. How do you do that?
Well, you have a database connection object, and the fact that you actually have this object doesn't mean that you're connected. Then
I understand. How do you get the database connection object?
You write it, or because basically in the end is either a link like what Sebastian is doing down, or it's an association with engine.
Okay. So you are explicitly writing that there is no creator function that, I mean, so I don't understand here in the case of this MongoDB connect, MongoDB connect or whatever it's called. You're saying that on a local machine, this is connecting to the single Mongo instance with that port number on the local machine. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is that the typical way that Mongo is run, to have a single instance on the local machine? It's not like there are multiple MongoDB.
The two sort of major ways of running it. One is on your local machine in order to stream very quickly out of core data. So for NetTrain, we'll use it for that sort of way. And the other way is that you use it as if you have a cluster of machines. And then you can connect to the cluster, like to the primary of the cluster or something.
But either way, you're saying, so what you're saying is that this MongoDB Connect contains some kind of socket specification, and you're giving there various forms of socket specification, which you should really get from the way that Socket Connect works.
For these ones, yes.
Right, but that's fine. But so then,
but the most common way is actually with a string. So it's if you have a cluster, MongoDB gives you like a string that represents the entire connection, all the SSL options and whatnot. This is very short, but like a complicated cluster has a very long string, and that's called a URI. So that's the most common way of connecting. So it takes this URI object.
Mongo client and a Mongo URI. Is one essentially lazy and the other not?
A URI is just a specification for, it represents all the information needed to connect, like the port.
I understand. That's why I'm asking. That one seems like it's like a lazy connection, which might or might not have actually been made, whereas the Mongo client thing up there is a connection that has actually been made. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
It's not correct. This is just, it represents this URI, and you use the URI to connect with the connection. And it validates whether the URI is correct, whether it's valid MongoDB URI.
What's the difference?
Yeah, I don't understand why you need that. Why don't you just give, if that's a unique mapping from Mongo URI from string, why don't you just give that string in the MongoDB connect function?
Sure, yeah, you can do that as well. You can use the string directly.
Why do we care about that Mongo URI ever? Why do we ever need to see the Mongo URI?
You probably don't need to see it.
Okay, then we don't need that function.
Okay.
Do we?
So it does validate the URI, but I guess you can always just try connect with it and we'll try validate it.
What we're doing for databases is this object is called database connection, and if you feed to this guy an URL, it evaluates with an association the first argument. So basically, you can do the validation right there. You have this object evaluate to an association, and
prefix that line just for my sake. Prefix that line with the word note, Sebastian, so you don't forget to remove it from.
Sure.
Okay. So that's. It sounds like what Ricardo has done for the database stuff is the same pattern you should probably follow here.
Okay.
All right. Let's keep going here. And then what gets returned where you say Mongo client, that should surely be a MongoDB connection object.
Okay, so this is actually the first piece where the philosophy of what we're doing can come in. So there's two sort of philosophies for this, a package like this. So we want to have, for multiple, like the most popular databases, it makes sense to have very close to the design of the other drivers in other languages. And these are often then used, for the higher level framework that Ricardo and them are building. So Postgres will probably have something similar. And there's sometimes you want to have the actual features that Postgres, exposes. But sometimes you just, you want to just have a high level overview interface to it, which is what they're building. So the design philosophy that I've taken for this whole package is that I follow all the other MongoDB clients in Python and Java, etc., so that there's very little surprise. And I use the same names, I use the same functions.
I think that's a mistake. I just don't think it's. I mean, well, let's see what these look like.
Okay. So just quickly before, so I've started the server on my computer.
Yep.
So I can now connect. And there's all these equivalent ways of connecting. And we can actually do a query, which is, Okay. So I guess, MongoDB, the way that it works is that there's two different levels of hierarchy. There are databases, which are sort of big base collections of things. And then there are collections. So actually, this is a good thing to maybe mention quickly. So MongoDB, there's database. Oopsie, sorry. A database, there's a collection, and there's a document.
Okay.
So document is just an association in Mathematica. A collection is a data set or a list of ASOCs.
Use a text cell there.
Actually, I should have used a text. Sorry. Yeah. It was.
Okay.
So in SQL parlance, collection would be table and document would be row.
And what?
So you said in SQL parlance. Just say
collection is a table, document is a row.
Document is a what? Is a field?
Document is a row and a collection is a table.
Yeah. So this is a row, although, in this case, obviously, it's arbitrary nested document associations, which is the nice property that we have.
These can be arbitrarily nested, which is not
exactly. Yes. And our machine learning data is exactly this form. It's like very nested data that doesn't happily sit in rows.
But conveniently, data sets happily support arbitrarily nested things.
Yes, exactly. So data sets, exactly. So there's an exact one-to-one mapping almost between data sets and documents in MongoDB.
Okay. So what is a database? A database is a collection of collections or what?
Exactly. It's just a collection of collections.
Is it an association of collections or what?
I guess you can, it's
a list of collections.
It's named. So database 1 goes to a collection. Yeah, so it's an association of collections.
Okay. And why exactly is it not just a data set of data sets? I mean, or you're saying it happens to be an association of data sets.
Yeah, okay, fine. Exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, I get it.
So that's the hierarchy, yeah. Okay, so you can see the database names, and then you can connect to a database, and you can connect with two different ways, either by GET or just with this argument syntax on the object. And then you get a database object. It gives you the name and the ID of the database. And then you can do things like get the collection, which is just the same sort of syntax, or with
why?
Get collection.
By the way, is it right to call it Mongo collection as opposed to MongoDB collection?
Okay, I mean, this is something we can decide.
I don't know. You tell me. What do you think is more sensible?
I think Mongo is better.
Okay, fine.
Like MongoDB, everything in front of it. I don't know.
Yeah, okay, fine. All right, just have it.
And it's a pretty uncommon name, Mongo. So I don't think it'll be a namespace clash easily.
Well, I mean, this is not going to be in system context anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just a package context.
Okay, so hold on. I don't understand. Okay, so the things that are coming back here are essentially pointers to Mongo collections and things like this, right? Now, normally we would call things like that Mongo collection object and so on.
Yes. So
arguably we should do that here. But
that, yeah.
So and if I look at what's coming back there, I see. That is what in my opinion, what you should do here when you say ID2 and things like that, instead of saying name Wolfram test, you should say collection : Wolfram test, database : whatever, because that way you'll have a clean thing which will show you, document collection database when you've drilled all the way down.
Okay. I thought the name was quite self-evident if it's a collection object.
Yes, but it will be clearer given that you've also got database there. I mean, it just seems like a natural way to do it. If instead of that you call, it's just a suggestion. I'm not sure it's right.
Okay.
Call the name collection, because then you'll get a nice thing where when you get down to a Mongo document, it'll say, and yeah, it'll have it all. Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Okay, hold on. Okay, so keep going. Let's just see some more stuff.
Okay, so Mongo document, yeah, it's an association. There's a set of types that it obviously natively supports, and there's a.
Wait.
What's going on? Yeah.
Okay, hold on. What is to-bson? Why is that not export string? Bson is binary JSON, yes?
Exactly. So it's a binary JSON format.
It's an import-export format of ours, yes?
It's not yet an import-export format.
Well, it should be.
But it could, yeah, so it could be.
Well, it should be. I thought we did have a binary.
We do, yeah. We have UJSON or something. I think Dorian put that.
UJSON, right?
Exactly.
UJSON.
So this is an alternative format.
Okay. So we should actually install it then it sounds like a fine thing to do. Is it obvious? So you've built an import-export framework for Bson, yes?
Exactly. And it produces either binary arrays or byte arrays, sorry, from a JSON, or it produces string representation or whatever else. This is exactly like the UJSON version.
Okay. Well, so can we please make sure, Sushma, can you make sure that is actually set up as an import-export thing? Maybe Dorian should do it, since he knows how to do it from having done UBJSON. Yeah, I assume you don't know how to do that quickly. Is that a true statement?
I've done some importers and exporters, but it will be faster for Dorian, probably.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
How are dates supported? Because in JSON they aren't really supported. Like you have some default serialization, or?
Okay, that's a great question. So just so people know about this, so to Bson, there's a set of types that Bson supports. So Bson is like an extended JSON. So it supports everything that JSON supports, but it also supports some extra types. So yes, it has various ways of type annotating things like dates. And these are the types that it supports.
Show me. Okay. So you're saying, given a Wolfram language expression that contains a date, there is a Bson representation of that.
Sure.
Is that correct?
Yes.
What is all this stuff? Wait a minute. This is okay.
So all databases have types that they support.
Yes.
And these are the types that Bson supports and that Mongo supports.
Fine. By the way, these tables don't use capital letters on their right-hand side.
Oh, yes, you're right. You're right.
Okay. No matter.
Yeah.
But that's not the most serious problem here. Okay. So, so let's go back for a second, because in our usual framework, I mean, okay, maybe there's some special function in this Mongo. Are we calling it? What was the name of the context here? Is it Mongo or MongoDB?
It's MongoLink. That's the context.
Okay. All right, fine. But in the MongoLink context, you can have all kinds of weird stuff. But for anything serious that's actually going to be, I mean, we should clearly have a Bson importer. Now, what you're saying is you've also got Bson to JSON converters, which we would naturally do. We don't naturally have a converter. We have something that goes, import it. I mean, I guess you can import it to a byte array or something, and then, it's a little funky, right? Because you can import the Bson and then export it again as JSON. Am I making sense?
Not quite. Not. I mean, I was reading this now, the Wikipedia page, and there are a lot of things that Bson supports that JSON doesn't.
Well,
I understand, but Sebastian has a Bson to JSON converter, which is obviously lossy.
Well, no, it's not. So it actually, so what it does is, let me show this. So basically, if the type is not in JSON, then it's called this strict conversion to JSON and then it will say this you can't convert, or there's like a loose conversion, and then it annotates the types. It says this is a number int and number double.
Okay, fine. So that's a fascinating form of JSON that we don't currently have, right? So that means, but that means that we need yet another. Let's see. Somebody is asking, by the way, on the live stream. By lazy database connection, do we mean that it will automatically reconnect when attempting to use the thing if the connection is dropped? I believe the answer to that is yes, right? Carlo and Ricardo. If when we have, for the database framework, the lazy connection, if the server drops the connection, right, we will automatically reconnect. Is that not correct?
I think that connection is kind of a misnomer in this case. It's more like I mean, whenever you're asking for data, then it connects. And whenever it stopped asking for data, then it drops. So
I see. So it will automatically reconnect. If the server, for some reason, decided to drop the connection, when you ask for data again, this will reconnect.
yes.
I think so.
Good.
There is another thing, I mean, unrelated to connections that I wanted to ask Sebastian, because we've run into the same problem for databases. Json supports decimals, but we don't really have anything equivalent to decimals in Wolfram language right now. I mean, we could represent them as rationals, but it's...
What do you mean by decimals? You mean binary coded decimal? Is binary coded decimal still with us?
No, not binary. Not binary. It's so a decimal is like a float, but instead of being binary, it's decimal. So
I see what you're saying.
How these ideas never die. That was in, right? That's binary coded decimal was for exactly that purpose, right? Because ultimately it's stored in binary, right?
Yes, but you have a guarantee that, I mean, it's useful. It does rounding differently from binary, from double and float.
God.
And it's very important for like banking application, I'm told.
Yeah.
So.
Right. It's the same reason that binary coded decimal was invented, and used in mainframes in the early 1960s. That's fascinating. That particular issue is not, I mean, if we're going to talk about that issue, we should talk to the numerics group about that issue. And I guess, I mean, Mark Safroniou is probably the person to talk to. I mean, if we really want to have something like that. Right?
I had sent out an email about it some time ago, and I had some responses. But let's not sidetrack this meeting with that.
Yeah.
Okay, but
we convert them to Rails
and discuss that, because that's an interesting thing to discuss. Is some kind of mechanism for it's, well, gosh, I can't believe we haven't escaped binary coded decimal. But anyway, never mind.
Yeah. Like the rules for precision are really weird.
No, I know. I mean, it's like calculators. You use BCD, and that's why when you do like the shift map with 2x mod 1 on a calculator, it'll do totally crazy things. Whereas on a computer, it will typically not do crazy things. By the way, we're hearing somebody needs to adjust their microphone. Okay, so let's go back here. Let me just understand this: BSON, JSON, etc. Okay, can we just put one thing as BSON import and export? Now, what you're saying is there is another form of JSON, which is a type, some kind of typed JSON thing, where types that it doesn't understand, it tags in some special way. Is that correct?
Well, it just has so for BSON, because it has extra types that JSON doesn't have, there's this representation it has. Yeah.
What that's saying is that is a form of JSON that presumably can losslessly go back to BSON in this case.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So the issue there is that we have these various forms of JSON in our import-export framework, and this is yet another one.
Well, this is just pure JSON. Like, it's perfectly valid JSON.
Well, I understand it's pure JSON, but the fact is it has to know, in this case, the natural way that we would go from, what we have is BSON to expression. We don't have a BSON direct to JSON in our standard import-export framework. It's not, we don't have an import-export.
Yeah, exactly. I see what you're saying.
JPEG to PNG or something. We're going through, an image, because that hasn't really come up as an important thing to be able to do. So we need to think about that. I mean, it is possible that there's enough of a proliferation of JSON formats that just like we have various string-to-string conversions, that we should have various JSON-to-JSON conversions. For example, in the case of strings, we have all sorts of things with character encoding, where we essentially have string-to-string conversions that work with different character encodings. I can imagine, if this proliferation of types of JSON is not slowing down, and I'm now hearing about another one that I've never heard of before. If that's really the case, then we should consider doing something like character encodings with strings with JSONs. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Okay, so I guess Tally was a big enthusiast of these various, he was the one who introduced whatever it's called, raw JSON and so on. So I guess we need to have a discussion that includes Tally, and I'm not exactly sure who has been dealing with maintaining the JSON importers and exporters. Was Dorian? Yeah, Dorian was involved.
Dorian wrote the main raw JSON one.
Wait, is Dorian here? Dorian was supposed to be here.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. So do you have any comments on these JSON things?
No, I think that's yet another schema for to express new data on the JSON format.
I agree, but my question is,
No, I understand. I mean, I see your point, and yeah, I think it makes sense maybe to have a toJSON from JSON function.
What good is that going to do us? The whole problem with that is, the problem is JSON to JSON conversion is what we can't do. We can do JSON from expression. What's that?
Why would you convert JSON to JSON?
Well, that's what you're doing here. You're converting BSON to JSON.
Yeah, well, that's different. That's BSON to JSON.
Well, okay, it's close enough, though. It's a JSON-like format.
Okay. So I guess that means the same thing with UJSON and all that. Like you might want to import UJSON into Wolfram language, or you might want to convert it to JSON directly.
Well, you might. I don't know whether you do, but okay. The point that I'm making is, let us figure out, and maybe Dorian and you can figure this out, whether it makes sense to try to have essentially a, JSON manipulation function or family of functions. It's probably going to be a JSON convert function or something like this. That will basically be something of the form, I would imagine what it would be, if you just write this down, something like, let's see. I mean, we could imagine, okay, listen, we could imagine something that's something like, what would the name be? Well, let's just try saying convert, although that wouldn't be the name because that's way too general a name. And then let's say an expression there, or typically be a string, and then it'll be something like, quotes format 1, arrow quotes format 2.
I see.
I mean, you could say format convert, but I'm not very is the name.
Yeah,
but
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Whatever.
But then most of those conversions would be supported by basically just, import the thing. I mean, if we say, I mean, that might be a useful function to have, GIF to TIFF or something.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a useful thing to have.
But now, I mean, the real case that's going to be useful is where the output, where it's file to file. That'll be the most common case, where that expression is really a file, and where the output is also a file.
Yeah, exactly. Often file to file.
Yeah, right. But I mean, but that will be represented. I don't really know. Okay, so listen, this thing then should be discussed in the import-export meeting, which, by the way, we haven't had for a while. We should be having one of those. I mean, we haven't needed this because we can always go through the intermediary of having something be an expression. But if it makes sense to do so, in other words, mostly this conversion, it's like language translation. Mostly, if you're translating from, Quechua to Swahili or something, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a direct translation. You're most likely going to go through English or something, right?
Sure.
And so similarly, in yeah, right. So fine. So in this case, we would support a few direct translations, and mostly we'd be going through an expression intermediary. All right. Let's go back to what you were talking about before. Okay. So
do this. Yeah. Okay.
So ultimately, the association that you get for the document is Okay, so wait a minute. Carlo had raised a thing about data objects, but are you satisfied with the answer to that, about that, Carlo?
Yeah, I went and read the Wikipedia page. It's actually represented as milliseconds from epoch. So, and it's well tagged, so you don't get confusion with the number.
Okay, fine. Okay, so that is a canonical form of, so that is a form of JSON used by MongoDB, is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
And is
So
MongoDB
usually,
by default using BSON as its internal representation? Is that how it works?
that's correct.
Okay, but for our purposes, it will be as if you have let's see, it's as if you you know, what you see inside Wolfram language is basically an expression, you know, an association with expressions in it. The fact
Exactly.
that underneath there's some BSON magic
almost never
going
see
on
it.
is irrelevant. Okay,
The
fine.
only reason that I document this here is that you can see the types, because it's important to know what types are supported natively.
Okay, but that's merely documentational, right?
It's
Because,
yeah, exactly.
I mean, are we doing anything where when you try and load something in and it doesn't have the right type, you know, and it has, are you declaring the types when you load it or not?
So, well, no. So, I mean, I can see what the types are. And if the type is not in BSON, then it will fail to convert. But you can also put a rule potentially saying that if the type is not known, you can convert it to a string, for example, and it will.
Okay, but I'm
just have
asking the question, when you load the thing up, when you originally create the MongoDB database,
Okay.
are you giving a schema which involves types?
No. So there's no schemas involved at all. So it's just it has a certain set of types that are always supported.
Okay, so it's a free-for-all. So any given
It's a free-for-all, exactly.
But so any given field could be a date, it could be a number, it could be a this, it could be a that, or not?
Okay. So by default, yes, but you can opt into checking. So you can have schema validation if you want.
Fine. That's a different thing. And we've also got, I mean, clearly we have a schema validation scheme, so to speak, for the database integration system too.
I assume
if I'm
so.
not mistaken. Right. Okay. Let's keep going. Can we keep going here?
Sure. Okay. So this, you can have an association. Obviously, it can be arbitrarily nested with lists.
So hold on.
arrays.
Let me just see how you access that. From the, could you scroll up a bit?
Sure.
And further up.
Sorry.
Okay. So I want to just go. I've got a handle to. I've got one of those URI strings that is a handle to a MongoDB database. Okay.
Yes.
And then what do? Ultimately, I am extracting. I don't understand why you're doing a Mongo get collection, all this kind of stuff. I don't understand why it isn't just an extraction that looks like, insofar as, I mean, why isn't the whole Mongo database as if it was a data set?
Okay. So basically what you're saying is, so what you can already do is, like, you can say, you've got a client, and then you can say, database, and then collection name.
Why don't you just, could you write that with a lowercase d to not confuse me?
Sorry, database.
Right, so that's the name of the database, the name of the collection, and then the name of, and then you can go into the association inside the collection, right? No, you can go in, the collection is then a data set.
It's a data set.
Right, so then you can keep going, presumably, and access things inside that data set.
Well, okay, so that's, yeah. So we'll get to that now, how to access things. There's a few trickinesses, but yes, you could convert it straight to a database if you wanted to.
Data set.
Data set. Yes, of course. You can convert it to data set directly, but you often don't want to do that because you're using this often when you've got massive data sets.
Right. I understand. So wait, hold on a second. So I mean, one of the things that would be a great goal here is to use MongoDB as backing store effectively for a data set.
Yeah, that's one use of this sort of thing.
Right, but what is the most seamless way to do that? So in other words, let's say you've got, I mean, what would be really nice is to be able to put inside a data set essentially a MongoDB connection object, and to have that mean, this data set has a virtual backing, right? A usual data set. I mean, this is the original idea of data set, is to have multiple kinds of backing stores.
Yes.
Right? And so in this case, we seem to be quite close with this to being able to just say data set of a MongoDB connection and have that be a lazily accessed thing that goes through the MongoDB system. Is that right, or am I confusing something?
You're pretty right. Yes. So the main thing is so the main work that's required is to translate things like selects and all that sort of thing to Mongo queries.
I understand. That's the
Yes, you can do that.
The same thing that's required in the case of the database integration project.
Exactly. Yeah.
So can I ask a question of okay, so the model that we have in the database project is that things are entity stores, right, guys?
Yes, yes, yes.
And the difference here, so in a sense, the database integration project, the relational database integration project, is providing a backing store for entity stores. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that is correct.
Now, in principle, one could one not? In certain, well, maybe this is crazy, but is it the case that certain databases are simple and degenerate enough, like a single table, for example, that they could actually just be represented as data sets? If there are no foreign keys and it's just a table, it is a data set, isn't it? Is that silence thinking, or is that?
I think yes, but Carlo and them might know better.
Carlo?
I guess you can think about data sets as well. But yeah, I mean, in general, everything that can no foreign key that is self-contained can be think as a data set. So yes, if you don't have foreign keys, you might basically represent that as well with a data set. Also, data set here in MongoDB is a better fit because is completely, there is no schema, so basically you can have.
Yeah, I understand, and it also is hierarchical, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, if we are building a backing store from scratch, so to speak, for a data set, then MongoDB is the choice. But the other question is, if as a piece of, some random data science project, you are handed some random legacy database and told to do things with it, my question is, can you view that database absent foreign keys as a table in that database as a data set? That's my question. And
sure. I mean, you can always import data as.
In our design for database integration, is there a convenient way to have essentially a virtualized data set? I mean, what we're doing is we're having a virtualized.
But we can have an option for entity value, basically, that is returning that. We don't have it now. But basically, when you do entity value, you can just say, you can just have like a, from an entity, you just construct a data set, and this can be like entity property association or something.
I see. Well, in fact, we do have that in the built-in entities. If you say entity value of tungsten, for example, comma data set, you will get try it.
Of what? Sorry, say that again.
Yes, that will
control
work
equals. Just say control equals. No. What are you doing? Just say what?
Control. Oh, sorry, control equal. Yeah.
Control equals.
I was not doing anything. There we go. Yeah.
Tungsten. Hit enter.
Sorry, I was just thinking. There you go.
Gosh, that bug again. Okay, wrap that whole thing in entity value.
Sure. So tungsten.
No. Entity value of tungsten comma data set is what you're going to do, which is equivalent to
value
the quote comma quotes data set.
Data sets.
Okay, and return. Okay, so there we go. So this is actually doing exactly what we just described. What Ricardo just described. So that's a fine thing. So that can be for certain databases. That will be okay. There you go.
Yeah,
magnificent. Okay, okay. So fine. So what this is saying, but nevertheless, what we don't have there is something where you can say data set and then give it a database connection object.
Exactly. We don't have that yet.
Right, but we can have the first case where it makes sense to have that is for the MongoDB thing, and potentially it makes sense to have that for regular databases, with the caveat. Well, what you guys are saying is that you have to link it to an entity. Is that what you're saying, rather than to a database connection? Ricardo?
Not sure what you mean. Sorry.
So what I'm saying is, under what circumstances does a database? Yeah, it doesn't make sense because it's a table in a database that corresponds to, if I'm not mistaken, that corresponds to the data set.
So the equivalence that we have right now is that a database table is a single entity. Yes.
Oh, it's a single entity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, you can have, like, in an entity store is the whole database, and so in an entity store you can have more than one entity.
All right.
And each entity is a database table.
Okay. Much like the tungsten thing we just saw, which is which is a.
Right. Then it makes sense to the table level to just have a data set. Of course, it will be a flat data set because that's the underlying data structure that you have. But yes, you can do that.
Okay.
It's actually nice because basically, you use the entity language basically to express query that are basically translated directly to the database. But then when you want to continue in memory, because I don't know, you have like a small data set right now, you can actually continue with a data set, for example.
Yeah, I understand. That's why. Okay, but in your model, you're basically putting it in memory. When you do this query, you're putting it in memory. You're extracting the data set into memory.
When you're doing dataset right now, yes, of course, nothing is blocking us from having, a back.
So what we need to watch is a parallelism between what we're doing with MongoDB, but it seems like because we want this possibility of a virtualized legacy database sitting out there that is accessed as a data set. But let's go back to looking at the MongoDB case. Okay, so can you keep going down? Okay, so now, we have certain operations like Mongo collection insert. Oh my gosh.
And you can see that this form here, it corresponds to the CRUD API of MongoDB. So this function for all the different versions returns this exact set of things.
Okay, so hold on. I mean, I don't think that's the right thing to return. I think you should return a success object if that's what you are really doing.
Okay, but you also want the inserted IDs. So are you saying like just make a success object that has all of these fields in it?
Yeah, a success object that has, because it'll format nicely as a success object. I mean, in other words, we don't usually have metadata. Like the insert function for lists just returns the list, right, that has been inserted into. So the things that this would naturally return, more naturally, this would return the, some pointer to the collection, some pointer to the newly mutated collection, right? You see what I'm saying? But the alternative here, given that you seem to want to return meta information, is to return a success object. Okay, but let's come back to this. Okay, so this is going into a territory that has not been gone in the database integration project because that doesn't have write capability. So we should, is Carlo here? Is Carlo paying attention?
No, that was
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry.
Right, okay.
I've been back for 2 minutes.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so look, we're starting to talk about insertion to MongoDB databases.
Yeah, I see that.
And for this, we need to be thinking a little bit how we're going to imagine doing insertion in the database integration project. But okay, let's keep going. Sebastian, can you keep going with this?
Sure. Okay. So you can so basically with keys, you can either give it a unique key or you can let it generate a unique key for you. So this is like an automatically generated key that has information about when it was generated and all that sort of thing. So you can actually.
How do I insert? How do I insert? How do I specify what key I want used?
Sure. So basically, MongoDB uses a special convention that says that anything, the base key called ID, this will be that'll be the key.
Blah blah.
So
blah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean it's a detail of MongoDB. So
yeah, but it's also rather yucky and not necessarily and conceivably something we should wrap in a different way. I mean, depending on whether what we're trying to do is just look. It seems to me there are two objectives in this project now. One of them is to support to just have a low-level interface to MongoDB. Well, okay, so the real question is, do we imagine that the use case is a MongoDB database already exists and we are connecting to it and tweaking it? Case one. Or case two, what we got was a giant tarball of a bunch of, of 10 million images or something, and we want to store them and we turn them into a MongoDB database. Do you understand the question? Because in the database integration project, what we are imagining is that what we are primarily dealing with is pre-existing databases that have been created, in the sort of general course of human affairs, so to speak.
I see.
So let me ask this question: in terms of machine learning data sets, for example, are there ones that are currently being being sent around as MongoDB databases, or is it that they're mostly just file systems?
Most of them are file systems.
Okay. Have you
with metadata that is
Yeah, I understand. How is the metadata typically represented?
As JSON, as like massive JSON files.
But where is that metadata? Is it one central piece of metadata, or is it within the file system somehow?
No, it's separate. So they just have a massive JSON or a collection of JSONs.
Okay, so
pretty natural.
Okay, so then one of the operations that we're going to need is take the file system and the collection of JSON metadata and construct from it a MongoDB database. Is that correct?
Yes, I guess that's, we wrote an internal version of this thing that does exactly that.
Okay, and is there a standard for the format of the JSON metadata?
No. That's
okay.
It's messy, very messy.
So how do
things like,
No, go ahead. Is there?
So as an example of this, I mean, one classic database or data set that we've got is MS Cocoa. That has things like bounding boxes, it has segmentation masks, it has descriptions of the images, it has tons and tons of metadata. And things like the bounding boxes, I've seen like 4 different conventions that people use for how to represent them. So, you have to convert them carefully. And even things like the segmentation masks have
all right, so
weird
this is a typical data scraping project.
Exactly.
We're not, okay.
Automating this is very hard.
Right, but from the point of view of the workflow that we expect our users to go through, we expect that what's going to happen is they receive a giant blob of whatever it is, tarball or something, of files and metadata, JSON information, and so on. And then they open that up, and then they are going to use Wolfram language code to create a thing which happens to be a MongoDB database. But as far as they're concerned, the most important thing is that they're just using Wolfram language code to go from the original thing that they were sent to this thing that is conveniently storing their data. Is that correct?
Sure, I guess in the long run, yes. That would be something.
What are you doing right now? Are you using some lower level tool to go from the tarball to the initial construction of the MongoDB DB?
Exactly. I mean, it's just a Wolfram language script that converts it into the format that we need it. And then it converts, it uploads it into MongoDB.
So that's what I'm saying, is that the thing you haven't shown me here, but maybe you are showing me now, is, given a giant file system, okay? I would like to just be able to say in one fell swoop with something like file system scan, something like file system map, but it wouldn't be file system map. It would be more like, file system to database or something. Just take that whole file system and stick the thing in the database.
Sure.
Do we have such a thing?
We do we've got a special packlet in machine learning for uploading our data sets. So we have, you have a massive file system, you have lots of metadata, and you can choose. At the moment, we send all the file stuff to S3, but you could also put it into MongoDB if you wanted to. But for us, there's various reasons why it's better to put on S3.
Okay, but I mean, what you're saying then is that the MongoDB stuff is just storing the metadata there, and the point is the actual file pointers are pointing off to S3.
Exactly. That's how we're internally storing it.
Okay.
Although there's like there is some bleeding, so things like segmentation masks, they also store in. They could be a file, or they could be in the database. It's a bit ambiguous.
I understand. But okay, so there is some, okay. But I think you've told me before that MongoDB, despite its name, is not actually good. I mean, up to what size of database does it make sense? Okay, if we're storing a bunch of images and I have, 5 terabytes of images, does
Yes.
it make sense to store them in MongoDB, or does it make more sense to store the images in a file system?
Okay, that's a very good question. So there's so this is so there's actually companies that do content delivery that use MongoDB directly as a file system. So the main use case where you get major advantages is if you want a geographically distributed file system.
Yeah, and
So,
why does that help you? Why does MongoDB help you with that?
Because it can store files, so it has a native file storage called gridfs, and gridfs, it's basically just another collection, and it cuts up the files into pieces of like 16 megabytes. And because MongoDB itself, like documents can be distributed across or geographically distributed automatically, the files will be the same way.
It's interesting. I mean, could we use that for our cloud object store?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is one of the major use cases of MongoDB.
But okay, how does it relate to like the Ceph distributed file system?
I do not know Ceph very well.
Does anybody know?
Someone else will have to tell you.
Can I ask you something? There's one thing that I don't understand about this in terms of using it, with many people writing on it from different points, which is how do you deal with like atomic transactions and stuff like that? How do you make sure that two people are not trying to modify the same document at the same time? And
so MongoDB is atomic at the level of document operations, I think. So
because if we were to use it for something like for the cloud object store and so on, then we need to have something that says this is now locked, you can touch it.
And so you have, as long as you work on one document, everything is atomic. And I mean, not all the time, but you can specify whether or not you want to get something that is probably written, or if you want something that is for sure written and distributed. There's many ways to work with the atomicity and the right. Like right acknowledgement, this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but this thing that says $isolated doesn't work on sharded clusters seems to be kind of a deal breaker for like.
That's probably for transaction, right? If you work on more than one document.
Yeah, if you're trying to work on multiple documents and the database is sharded, then you can't isolate.
Yeah, no, there is no atomicity if you have more than one document. Yes.
Okay, zoom out for a second here. Okay, can we go back to the thing here? Okay, so the question that then you're answering is you want both cases. You want both a file system and you want the actual payload data in the MongoDB database. And you're saying that the MongoDB database doesn't fall apart. If I put a petabyte of data in it, it will still work. Is that true?
Exactly. I mean, that's the whole design, that it can work to any scale.
Okay. Like
that's its major claim, at least.
Okay, but so then for us, we need this concept that eventually down at that bottom level association, there can either be the actual image, for example, or there can be a file that corresponds to that image. Is that right?
Yes, correct. And that file could live, either in the database or it could live in some file store.
Although we may need a representation of something which is essentially a lazy, right now for us, a file is, the file symbolic object represents the file. It does not represent the content of the file. Do you get what I'm saying?
I understand.
But for some purposes, we may want something, and we have that for images of a dynamic image, so to speak, which a dynamic image can, if you look up dynamic image, you can use dynamic image with a file.
Dynamic,
if you spell it right.
Oopsie, yes, dynamic.
Okay.
Oh, you can put a file, I see. Audio, the same thing, I think you could do.
Yes, right. So in a sense, there is so then for you in this MongoDB thing, if we're dealing with images in files, you could simply use dynamic image itself as the final, then it will just work, presumably. Well, I guess, I think you can do image processing operations on a dynamic image, and some of them will even do really interesting things out of core. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I understand.
And so that would seem like a very useful thing to have here, but we may want a more general construct that is more like a dynamic file that says this thing represents the content of the file such and such. Makes sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, so let's keep going here. So you've got this MongoDB insert.
Okay, so the idea that it's that the key that it generates, you can see like what, you know, it has information like the generation time, the machine ID, and whatnot. Then you can also obviously.
So let's keep going. I want to go back to that in a minute.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
So yeah, we can also obviously have lists of associations. It's more efficient to insert lots of things at the same time.
Okay.
And then the queries. So the queries, the most simple thing is that find one.
What is that?
It just finds one document.
Just a random document?
I think it's like the first one that it finds.
Okay.
And then you can obviously there's a whole query language. So the query language is like, you build it with associations. So for example, you want to find all the documents with H5, and you find one of them with that criteria. And there's like, there's all kinds of.
What's frustrating about this is dataset does that with select, hash age equals 5.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So there's a translation between the two.
No, I understand. But in general, we have this conflict because in the case of the implicit entity stuff, which works with entity store, we have the fairly natural, age arrow 5 type thing. We don't have that in dataset, do we?
Don't think so.
Right. So what we probably need is a wrapper function that's like query, right? Where what you do is you say, if you type it in, you say dataset, just a dataset, and then, outside the dataset, the query, right? The query to the dataset is something that says, I don't know, let's just say the function, I don't know, rows matching or something like that, or but not the right word, but let's say rows matching as a function, rows, with capitals.
Wait, okay, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, just an imagined system function, rows matching, and then in the argument there would be, age arrow 5, yes, for example, like that. See what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that would give us something which is the analog of what we're doing with entities. Can you comment on that, database folk here?
I think that is fine, except again the thing I really don't like is take largest in this context.
Take largest.
The heck does
that? Take largest. I mean, in custom entity, sorry, not just in custom entities, but when you do an implicit entity, you can always say, give me the 5 largest cities. And that's not really a select anymore. It's not a local per row operation anymore. You have to look them at the whole table. So,
right. Well, I mean, the other possibility, which I think Tally had discussed at one point, is simply having dataset remove that rows matching and just have age arrow 4 do this, and then be able to say age arrow take largest of 4 or something like this.
Yeah, I think that's kind of wrong.
What's kind of wrong?
To be able to do take largest like that.
Okay.
Because it's not.
That's a separate discussion. Could we also, this particular thing about having these, age arrow 4 and so on, be something supported in dataset? Could we get, let's see, Sushma, could you arrange, I mean, Xavier and the other people working on and Tally, and yes. I guess Sebastian, we need to have a discussion about that, because if we can do that, we can potentially merge what you're talking about here with MongoDB with what's being talked about with entity stores, etc. Right? And in addition, it's very similar to what happens in text search, which is also nice. Okay, so let's keep going.
So this is a very rich query language. Like you can do all kinds of things, greater than, obviously logical operations and whatnot. And yeah, there's the third syntax for this is that you can project. So you can like filter out, remove certain fields from what will be displayed.
What do you mean by that?
So basically, you often you don't care about certain fields, and you can make it come back much faster if you don't return them. So you can project them out.
So you're asking for, in the case of data set, you would simply be in that second argument, right? The first argument will be giving you the row. The second argument will be determining in that row which fields, right?
Exactly.
So is this the same? So it will be good to get the syntax to actually agree with the syntax for data set.
So I guess the trickiness with that is, so for a high level view, I totally agree, like that's important. But for a low level interface, you can look at the documentation for MongoDB for how to write projections, and there's like a lot of complicated things with operators and various things that they support. That it's just better to say, okay, the low level framework.
No, but how can you support that here?
How can you support what?
All those Mongo weird things.
Because the way that they do this is that with dollars, they can do things like... What
would you type in?
Yeah, so you'd say something like, let's slice this guy. Well, there'll be a syntax like, this will be, the date will be a compound object. There'll be slice of, I don't know, 0 to 2 or something. I don't know. This might not even make any sense.
Okay, but what you're doing there is you're making a partial MongoDB syntax. You would be better off just saying...
But this is exactly how the Python all the frameworks work. Like they all do exactly this thing. Like Python uses.
I understand, but the obvious thing to do there is simply have whatever the MongoDB string is, have something called Mongo query, which has inside it just whatever random string you feel like putting in there. You see what I'm saying?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So you're saying that.
So what you do there is you'd say date arrow. Right, in that case, you would just say, date arrow Mongo query of $slice blah 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 blah. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah. So instead of doing an association like that, you'd say this is a Mongo query object.
No. You'd say,
but you said date.
Whatever this Mongo query, yeah. When you get down to this thing where you want to say, instead of saying date arrow 5, you're using this fancy Mongo query thing to select what aspect of the date you want to get. You could just do it with this Mongo query, with a Mongo query wrapper, which is much like what we have. We have the search query wrapper that takes the various kind of shorthand syntaxes that are traditional in search engines.
I see. Okay.
I think it's called search query. Look it up. Can you look that up? No, search query string. That's the one. Okay. So see that has all those weird things, right? All the weird shorthands that people expect from a search engine are in there, right?
Okay. So this would be an alternative way of
actually it should be called Mongo query string.
Mongo query string, exactly. Okay. So this would be an alternative way of doing this.
Yep. Okay. Let's keep going. I'm still, functions is named like Mongo collection find one, leaving me fairly cold. But let's try and get through to the end and try and see what else there is here.
Okay. Sure.
Oh my gosh, the Mongo cursor. Oh. Okay.
Okay. So basically, so find one, it just returns a single document, but find is where the action already is, and this guy. It's a cursor.
For some reason, by the time we're talking about binary coded decimal and cursors, it's just like, okay.
Well, you need some way of having an iterator that you can iterate over the data set.
I guess. I mean, if you're not doing functional programming, you need that.
Well, I mean, how would you? I mean, you have to have some way of. I mean, you can do lazy evaluation, I guess, in the functional paradigm.
Yeah. Yeah. Why would you need to explicitly iterate? I mean, in other words, if you're doing an operation over the whole data set, then just do it.
But if you want,
plumbing take care of the question of which thing comes in when.
Well, the problem is that if the data set is 1 petabyte of stuff,
you don't want to.
Then you better be using Leonid's
result. Yeah.
Okay, then you better be using Leonid's chunking mechanism, which is a nice functional thing that doesn't require you to explicitly, iterate over anything.
By the way, I think that might work, but I guess I wanted to ask Sebastian, all this Mongo collection find one, are these like select and select first, or first case and cases? Like Why are you calling them like that? Are you trying to map as close as possible to the API?
So MongoDB has an API that all the different drivers have to follow to be consistent with each other. So it's basically the design is that they're consistent with Python, and the same naming is used. So between C++ or Python or whatever else driver you've got, these are the names that you need to support.
Yeah, but I mean, that's not solving the problem that we're solving. You've told me that most of the time nobody knows or cares that this is Mongo underneath.
Well, no, I mean, okay, there's different levels that you want to use this at. So there's some users like they want to have some way of interacting with MongoDB directly in Mathematica, and they want, they know MongoDB in Python or something else, and they want the same interface. And on Stack Exchange, there's some of the most upvoted comments are people asking like how to interact with MongoDB in Mathematica. So there's like that sort of level, like people that want to actually use MongoDB, and they have the same functions that they have in all the other languages. Then on top of that, there's people that don't care about databases. They just want to have something very simple. They want a data set, and they want to have a backend for the data set.
Yes.
That's something that's built on top of something like this. But this is not, it shouldn't aim to be everything. This is like a low-level framework, and you can build on top of this.
All right, let's keep going.
It's super fast. Has no overheads. It just does what it does.
A remarkable marketing pitch.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, let's keep going.
Okay, fine. So yeah, you can read from the cursor. So sure, I mean, if there's a lazy framework that is,
what is that return value? Is that the success object again, or is that some kind of cursor location?
Which thing?
The return value of read occurs.
This is a document, or yeah. So you're just reading through the document
being read. No, wait a minute. What's being returned? Is that similar to when you did an insert? What was returned from the insert?
The insert, it returned the key that was used for the insert. So if I inserted it, it tells me, okay, this key was used. And then it tells you how many were inserted, etc.
Okay, so that other thing is a document ID, is document representer.
Exactly. So yeah, it's just again, like if you don't specify this field yourself, then it automatically puts an ID in it that's unique. Because it's a key value store. It must have a unique ID, every document. And I guess that's one difference with dataset, is that it has to have a unique ID.
I mean, yeah, we could, in principle, we could say what the memory location of something in dataset was, and that would be...
Sure, exactly, yeah.
But, is the unique ID relevant to anybody other than the implementer here? Okay, so what you're saying is, in principle, and it's actually a nice feature that could be even useful for dataset, is that if you want to drill down and just reference a particular element of the MongoDB database, you can just get that UUID and do it that way.
Exactly, yes. So yeah, you could see it as a UUID that every row has in the dataset.
Is it every row or every element?
Okay, every element. Well, in this case, every row, I guess.
Okay, so in the case of a data set, our way of addressing an element of a data set is essentially a path, a part path, so to speak.
Exactly, yes.
Right. So this is saying that, which is kind of interesting. It's saying, imagine that there's also a UUID for every sub-expression.
Exactly, yes.
It's interesting. It's interesting now that we have UUIDs for cells in notebooks, for example. There is the interesting global question of whether there's the possibility of having UUIDs for every, or conceptually having UUIDs for every expression part. It's awfully close to having, we're again returning to, it's awfully close to having a pointer, but it's a pointer that is guaranteed to be unique.
Sure, exactly.
That's actually kind of an interesting idea, but okay, all right.
Okay,
that's a separate thing. Go ahead.
A separate thing. So you can then, with read list, you can obviously read a whole thing. You can obviously make a data set out of it straight away. Then obviously once you've finished reading your documents, in analogy with database link, it returns null if it's finished.
Wait a second. Sorry. Somebody's asking, by the way, isn't the Mongo cursor server side like a TSQL cursor? In other words, I think the answer
It is.
yes, it is. I mean, the cursor is a thing that represents. Yeah, I mean, it's
on server side completely, and you can actually get a list of cursors that are running in MongoDB if you want.
I see. The point about it being server side is that it is not just that you are referring to it in some way on the client. It is that there is actually a data structure on the server that represents this.
I think it's because if you have a server-side cursor, generally, I mean, maybe it's not the case for MongoDB because I don't know very well, but for other databases like Postgres and so on, if you have a server-side cursor, the cursor can fetch, for example, 1 million row and give you a chunk of them so that you don't blow up your memory. So basically, the server-side cursor is taking care of doing the query and returning to you some partial result of it as soon as you need them.
Okay. So in the database integration system, do we have a notion of cursors or not?
They are not exposed. Of course, we are using them. We are managing them underneath. Yeah.
But so for large data sets, what do you do? Like if there's a query that returns something that's too big for memory.
Sorry, Sebastian, what was the question?
Sorry, so if you make a query that returns a number of documents or information
we don't
that's
have a
bigger
plan for that right now.
Okay.
We need some kind of lazy result set, either using lazy list, but of course, like if you're doing normal of a query, and
yeah, then you're going to get the million rows and it's going to blow up.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it would be good to have those things correspond. I mean, so if there is a lazy, essentially what we're saying in all these cases is that we want a lazy data set, because that's the original thing we want here is a data set backed by MongoDB. You're saying the data set could also be backed by a cursor in MongoDB, so to speak.
I mean, the cursor represents the query, so not really. It's backed by there's a collection, and a query would be like a lazy result set that you can get the results piece by piece.
Wait a minute. So, but why isn't that just another? I mean, why isn't that like data set again? Why is it the result set? I mean, it's well, you're saying it is a data set that has been queried, but
yes,
the results are not returned to the client side. They are lazily kept. I see.
Server, yeah.
Right. So in other words, in a simple case, it might be a data set blah, blah, blah of select blah, blah, blah. Now, normally that would happen, immediately, but you could imagine a version of that where it was maintained lazily.
Exactly. That's what you want for large data sets.
And then the question is, let's see, somebody from the live stream is asking, what would functional programming on the client side have to do with iteration? Is that in response to something that I was saying earlier about functional programming in this? Does anybody want to comment on that?
I'm not exactly sure what the question means.
All right, onward. Okay. Okay.
Okay, you can also convert the cursor directly into a data set if you want. And then, yeah, I mean, this is the sort of syntax that you won't like. But yeah, you can use it like this. You can iterate through a set of things like this.
So what the heck? I mean, why isn't that just a map? Why isn't that just a map of quotes underscore ID onto data?
So how would you terminate it then? Are you just saying you should overload map to take in?
Well, it isn't necessarily a map, but it's a Mongo map, right? Why isn't this Mongo map? Mongo map.
Okay.
Mongo
so you're saying like
not map,
Mongo map.
Mongo map. Mongo map of hash sign quotes of quotes underscore ID. No,
okay,
what
fine.
are you doing?
Okay, fine. I mean
hash sign of quotes inside your underscore ID thing. I'm replicating.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, fine. Like ID. and then maybe do
Ampersand.
something with this,
Ampersand.
export this or something.
Why are you exporting anything? Ampersand after
Okay.
that, okay? And then map that onto your Mongo collection.
I think that the problem is not really, like, you don't really need to call it Mongo map. You can probably just overload map in some sense. The main problem is that you can't really have generic functions and expect them.
I know that. I realize that. That's why I'm suggesting calling it Mongo map, because there are only certain functions,
Yeah,
just
but
like with the database.
But what I'm saying is that map is exactly the same operation. It's pure function. That's not exactly the same pure function.
Right.
That's
so
why
how are we handling that in the database integration case?
we have entity function.
What's that?
We introduce entity function, which is something that will complain if you try to do something that that is not supported by the backend, and which has slightly different semantics because sometimes it operates on transposed results. No, it's not yet in the documentation.
Right, but so what we need then is something analogous to that in this case. That is the functional way of doing this, is to have something that is called something like, database function or something. That isn't a very good name for it, but database function, which is an impoverished version of the function that can take in those things which are actually executable on the database.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how it works with Mongo, but one concept that's really important for SQL is that not all functions are created equal, and some of them do aggregations. So,
Sure.
Yeah,
So
I don't know.
aggregations
Mongo has.
Yeah, so it has a full aggregation framework.
Okay.
So I mean, I can show you a few examples of this if you want. So, I mean, a very basic aggregation operator is sample. But you can do, you can modify documents, delete them. Okay, there's actually no aggregation example here, but fine. You can aggregate things as well, like calculate the mean of, some massive set of documents that gets done on client side.
Okay, so how many of these funky Mongo collection functions are there? Update many, delete many, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How many of these are there?
So that's a good question. We can see very quickly. Let's do a collection. Wait. Mongo collection aggregate. That's the aggregation framework.
Did you just delete what you'd written in that cell? You probably don't want to do that.
That doesn't matter. It's in Git. It'll just refresh it. I'm just going to make a separate copy of this thing and just.
All right. Fine.
Yeah, so aggregation is count. So you can count how many documents there are according to a query. Delete many, delete one, finding.
What's the difference between aggregate? Like, why isn't count type of aggregation?
I guess it is a special kind of aggregation. I'm not sure why, but it's seen as a separate.
I mean, we treat it that way. And
Really?
The other question is, do you have an aggregate by?
Aggregate by what?
Yes.
No.
Like for example.
It's the same thing that that Packlets don't. They don't make the set usage from the documentation. This is a bug that needs to be fixed at some point.
Yeah. Well, anyway, in the one that we're doing for entities in SQL, there's a difference between basically you get to a table and then you count how many rows were returned, or you can say count by sex and you get the number of males and number of females in one fell swoop. So.
I see. Okay, I'm not. Yeah, I don't think so.
All right. Okay. Let's zoom out, and we need to wrap this meeting up soon.
Yes.
Okay. So you've got a bunch of pretty wacky, Mongo pandering functions here that are, very much following whatever the conventions for the Mongo, APIs have been.
Yes.
That's, okay, that's fine for serving one particular. I mean, what we've done in this meeting is to talk about a few design tweaks to that will bring it more in line with other things. I think the more general thing is to take what you've done and actually make it be a way of backing data sets.
Sure.
Right? And I mean, you're also not showing. Yeah, I mean, some of these things like insert, some of this stuff is just deeply procedural programming like, and just seems like completely the wrong thing. But Does
But
it?
for a low-level framework that follows closely what MongoDB does, like that is the right thing. And
It's an
you can
okay.
build with these procedural things, you can build on top of that for
No, I
higher level.
understand that. I understand that. But so what we need to do, okay, so there are two objectives here. One is just the review of this going in as an experimental, package where I think it looks, it looks good. It looks fine. It all seems reasonable. It would be nice to get these things like the connection objects and so on straightened out so that those can be, so that as we go forward, even though the operations will change, that those don't have to change, because that's something where somebody may have stored something with those connection objects in it and so on. But I think we were fine with those. Now let's talk about the sort of the more general roadmap for how we integrate this with dataset. Okay.
Okay.
And well, what do you think is the? I mean, in to my mind, one of the big issues with dataset is something, you are setting up a dataset and you want it to be on disk. Okay. And this is one way of having the dataset be on disk. So it is dataset of, and then it's basically, I don't know what we want to call it, external, what the heck is this? It's an external connection of some kind.
Yeah.
I think there is one important impedance mismatch here, which is that in general, if you do an operation on a dataset, you get another dataset back.
Yes.
Here, the operations are a bit more eager. Like when you transform, you do some operation that's doing a select. You don't get out a lazy result. You get
that's the main problem.
Yeah.
Which with dataset, you don't get a lazy result.
Yes.
No. With Mongo, you don't get a lazy result. With this, you.
Wait. Why don't you get a lazy result?
What I'm saying is that you in dataset, imagine you have like a 1 petabyte MongoLink thing somewhere, and then you want to say select, I don't know, the first
something very specific where you're going to get
the thing in MongoLink. You can execute the thing and get back a list of results, but it's not clear to me that what you do can still be represented as a
But you're saying the list of results is still lazy. That is, those individual results might still be quite big. Is that what you're saying? As opposed to you drill all the way down, and in the end, you're just going to get the answer 3 out.
What I'm saying is that you call select of dataset with whatever operation, you still get a dataset out. Now, can you do that in MongoLink? Like, can you still represent it as dataset that contains just a connection to a MongoLink thing?
Why not? Maybe using one of these cursors. Maybe the connection is modified. What's that?
Yeah, so it could be a cursor, but then the problem is as soon as there's a cursor, like doing further operations on that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, you see what, and that's.
No, but I thought you were trying to sell me on the fact that cursors were these things that could be procedurally kicked in all kinds of different ways.
I mean, they are a result set. So, okay, I guess you could do operations on them.
Well, my question, like, imagine if you do 2 successive selects on a dataset that's backed by, will you get a cursor that automatically does like the end on the clauses of the 2 selects, or will you have to do it, sequentially?
No,
exactly.
I mean, no. Wait a second. You get out a cursor that represents that result set.
Yeah.
Then you apply another select, and presumably that result set is further projected in your phraseology to something different, to a yet further result set, which is the combination of those 2 things.
But it might not be possible to do that on the database side. So you'd have to do that locally. So you'd have to stream in the data and do the select.
At some point, you might have to do it locally. Yes, eventually there'll be some operations that you have to do locally. But I mean,
yeah. I mean, I think that one of the cool things about what we're designing with Leonid and Ricardo is that basically, since everything is still a table, there's like this nice composition of operations where, I mean, even if you're doing a bunch of complex operation, until you call entity value, you still have like some kind of lazy representation of a table of data on the database side. And so all the operation take a table and return a table. And I don't know if you can do it with Mongo.
I understand. I think that there's a 0th level issue here, which is, let's say you were sent a tarball, but you want to turn it into a data set. Okay? You weren't sent something which was already a well-formatted MongoDB anything. You were just sent the raw data in some form that is, essentially a file system, right?
Yeah.
So the very 0th operation is, how do you take, and this is something, Tally was talking about at some point, is taking a CSV file and being able to say data set of a big CSV file.
Yeah.
Right, which we're not doing right now. We're simply saying, in other words, the thing we might have is to say data set of file of whatever. Why don't you write that down in your notes here? That's sort of a top level case of data set of file of whatever it is, right? We're not supporting that right now. Something.csv, for example. Yes.
Yeah.
And, that could be something that operates out of core. It could be something, yes, exactly. So we're not even supporting that right now. But at least it's fairly clear what the transport medium is for a CSV file. It's just a CSV file, right? The transport medium for what should be unpacked as a MongoDB database is less clear.
Yeah, but even with the CSV, like you take a data set that's representable as a CSV file, you perform certain operations on it. You might not be able to save it again as a CSV file because you changed the structure.
Absolutely. That's correct. Yes, that's absolutely correct. So that's a good case where, look, there's the question of what the native thing that it came in as was, and then can you preserve that? And my claim is that most of the time what will happen is it will originally be imported by you from some crazy, random, unwashed format, okay? Then you will turn it into something which, in our case, we want to, let's say we use MongoDB for the thing that you turn it into, right? At that point, you cycle around in MongoDB representing everything that comes out as some kind of MongoDB object, right? And maybe subsequently you export it as file systems or whatever else you want to export it as.
Sure.
And so the thing we have to understand is, how do we assemble, given that something is coming in some random way, how do we assemble it into a big MongoDB database? And I don't think we're doing that by doing a bunch of inserts, are we? Or are we?
Well, we're not automating at all. No, it's up to the user to read it in somehow with read line or who knows what they want to use.
Yeah, but how does that work? I mean, how do you put it out into the MongoDB database?
How do you put it?
Look, if I have the thing, if I'm reading from a CSV file and I want it to wind up in a Mongo database, what do I do?
Well, you write if it's too big for memory, which I guess is the case you're talking about, right?
No, even if it's in memory. If it's in memory, are you saying I just do an import of CSV?
Yeah.
And then what do I do? How do I write it out with the Mongo thing?
Okay, sure. So you import the file, then you do Mongo insert or collection insert. And then you have the collection that you want to insert it into, bam, like that. It depends, obviously, what the format of the thing is.
No, that won't work. For CSV, it won't work.
Yeah, fine. Okay, for the CSV, it won't work. Fine.
Okay,
for
so let me make a suggestion. Is there a possibility of taking, is there a single file that represents a Mongo database? Like with an access database, there's just a file that can represent the whole database, right?
You can dump the MongoDB database into one file, yes.
Okay, so would it not be useful to have an export format then, which has the feature that it will make that MongoDB dump file from whatever data structure we have, from whatever expression data structure we have, it will create a MongoDB dump file.
Yeah, that's a useful thing.
Right, that can then be used to, that can then be the thing that you use that is then now is essentially a lossless thing that you can then compute with inside the virtual data set.
I see.
You should make a note that you get my idea.
Yeah, no, I understand what that is. So like it's basically
So for example, that can be transported. If you wanted to transport that to the cloud, you could do that, and you could unpack it again as a MongoDB, as an active MongoDB database. See what I'm saying? Convert to text cell, the first thing it offers you.
But by the way, there's another thing we could do, given that we are like super fancy symbolic programming language, is that the whole operation that you do in the data set never actually get executed. So if you have an out-of-core data set, you do select, you do map, you do whatever you want.
Oh, I see. Exactly.
And we just annotate them and annotate them. And only the moment when you say
yeah, that's what it is.
Or maybe we have some kind of thing that works like take, that can move the cursor of like 10 steps, something like that, 10 items, if you don't want to get everything completely in memory at the same time. I think we have to talk about it with Leonid and Tali as well.
Yeah, exactly. This is a longer discussion.
Because I don't know if...
I think what this ends up being is something where you are effectively maintaining a symbolic query, where instead of saying select on the data set like that, since usually the queries are, trailing things where it's data set of the query, we could say something like data set of symbolic query.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like symbolic query or something.
Yeah.
And then the way we would resolve it, well, that isn't the right syntax. The right syntax is data set open close, and then open, and then symbolic query close.
The thing that is good about the design of an entity in this case is that basically entities are by design always symbolic, and only when you apply entity value you have something that executes the query. Yeah. In dataset, there is not a clear distinction like that. I don't know if
there isn't a way of representing a symbolic query. This is not the syntax I meant. Get rid of the select there.
Okay. Yeah, fine. Yeah, I see what you're saying. So there's like data set, and then you have like this
of symbolic query, and then inside the symbolic query is the select.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, does that evaluate to data set itself?
No, it can't. It has to go into some symbolic.
It just stays unevaluated.
Okay. Fine. Right. And then you can do another symbolic query on this.
Right. And then you do another symbolic query on that. And then at some moment you say dataset resolve or some such other thing.
Well, as soon as you try and get something out, maybe like normal or who knows what.
Maybe it's just normal of that. Yes, does it. Or dataset as either dataset resolve or normal. Normal would then just actually compute.
Yeah,
it might be useful to have something that doesn't do like normal, so it doesn't return a list of associations, but just gets the data set in memory. And it's still a data set, but it's in memory.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Right. So you don't actually want normal. So that would be something like, data set. It's something like data set. Oh, I don't know. It's query resolve. I don't know quite what the name is. Yeah. Data set.
Okay, I need to go. Now, I think this is a very good discussion to have.
All right. Okay, let's continue that. One more thing. I'm sorry. For the machine learning stuff that's being done, I assume Megan, who has been quite silent so far, has. Megan, have you been using this stuff?
Yes, I have.
And do you want to give any comments?
So I've run into a few issues with really big data sets, but other than that, everything works pretty well. I've just been basically fixing the file references in there. So I've been doing a lot of using the find, using the insert, using the update functions, and yeah.
So can you give us an example of something you've done with this?
Sure. So basically,
okay, fine,
there's, do you want me to share?
Yeah, if you can, and just for a minute. And Sebastian, can you hang around for just a couple of minutes, and then I think we all have to go. Megan, can you go ahead and share?
Sure. So this is an example, one example of what I've been doing. Let me scroll back up here. Basically, I'll connect to the database, and then we have there's sort of a deprecated way of storing file references that we're changing because it's not supported really in Mongo anymore. So basically what that is there's a, it's like file.id, it's a nested structure. So the file name is stored in that kind of a structure. And then what I'm basically trying to do is make it so that it's no longer nested. So basically it's just file goes to whatever instead of being nested. So basically, yeah, I've just done like, do a query where you pull out all of the things that meet the criteria. So sometimes you have to do this in chunks because it's really large. It's like 9 million documents in this collection. So you pull out all the documents that you're looking at, and then usually I will have pull out the file names themselves, and then loop over a list of them to basically update the file. Unfortunately, the current version of Mongo doesn't have, it can't do self-referential finds or updates, which is going to change in the future. But
that's our version can't do that, or MongoDB in general?
MongoDB in general couldn't do that. So now it's being changed in version 3.6, which is going to be rolled out next month.
Okay.
So hopefully.
So what you were doing here was basically this was on some image data, on some image training set. You're basically.
So maybe there's a deployment of MongoDB that we've got, and there's all of our machine learning data is inside there, and it started actually a long time ago from Wendy days, and it's now she's fixing a lot of things in it. So she's doing a lot of surgery, checking that there's no duplicates of things and all kinds of things.
So this is a Mongo instance that we have that is maintaining our training sets.
Exactly.
Yes.
Precisely.
Yeah, this is the remote instance.
Okay. So how many so for example, what were the levels here? How many databases, how many collections do we have?
So there's one sort of main database that's like all of the actual real data that we want to have.
Just show Compass. Sorry. Just quickly open Compass and show them what it looks like. So Compass is like a graphical user interface for the collections and whatnot. You can just very quickly see what it looks like. Okay. I mean, the password is not, that is protected.
Yeah, I'm opening the read-only.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so this the machine learning data is sort of the main database that we have where real data goes in that we actually want to store. We have basically we have sort of sandbox areas for each user so that they can upload stuff there. They can decide what they want to do with it.
Click on the database name, machine learning data.
So we have a bunch of collections in here. So each of these is a different data set. And then, so you can see like we've got CFAR 10. So basically, it just has like a unique ID, an image class, a validation role, and then a reference to the file name, which is stored on S3.
But all the collections are different. So just go click on MS Cocoa.
So yeah, this has a lot of like really nested stuff in here. That
bounding boxes and superclass, class, and then image information.
Right, and then there's like MS Cocoa specific stuff that has different captions and like an image ID from MS Cocoa.
Isn't chili dog spelled wrong there?
Chili dog. Oh, yes, it only has one L, but that's the way that's not on our end. That's
I understand it's not on our end. It's just one of those lovely things in the. Oh dear. Okay.
Anyway, so this is what the structure looks like, and then there's like for files, like we extract lots of metadata, like the size of the images and the color space and all that sort of thing for every file that we upload here. And then the sort of workflows that people upload to the sandbox, and then Megan approves and then sends it to the main database.
Okay.
But she's been spending most of her time like fixing up the main database, and she's moving on to like uploading lots of things like audio data and.
Cool.
Right. Yeah.
That's great. All right, fine. So I I wouldn't mind seeing this MongoDB thing one more time before it actually goes into 11.3. I mean, go ahead and put it all in 11.3. Let's look at it one more time with whatever cleaning we've discussed in here included in it, and then let's loop back and have a separate meeting and talk about the full integration with dataset. That makes sense?
Okay, fine. That sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye.
See you all soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.